Welcome to Healing Tales. I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, here to help you become the best pet parent you can be, with simple, natural care that works for real life, real budgets, and real pets. Hey, welcome to another episode of Healing Tales. I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts, and today we're talking about listening to healing, how meditation, music can transform pet wellness. And with me today are Fallon, Morningstar, and Ian Morris. If you don't know them, they are truly trailblazers in the wellness world. Fallon's Radiant Balance System revolutionizes women's health through sound healing, meditation, and functional nutrition, while Ian's frequency-minded music and LTS method have redefined sound therapy globally. Together, through Listening to Smile and its expanded networks, they're connecting art, music, and holistic well-being. And so, Fallon and Ian, I am so delighted that you're here with us on Healing Tales. And for those that are unfamiliar with your work, can you share what kind of started your journey into the healing power of sound and meditation music?
Yeah.
Would you want me to go first?
You should go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having us on here. Really, my journey into more of the wellness space started when I was 26 years old. And I basically didn't get direction from Western medicine. And so I turned to functional health. And I ended up doing a food sensitivity test, a hormone profile, a stool test, and that was validation for me to say, I'm not crazy in my mind. Like, there are things that are wrong here, and we have direction to heal. How can I adjust my lifestyle to also, fast track that progress too, and not just take supplements or go through a 90-day protocol, right? I want it to be sustainable. And so after going through that, I felt a lot better, but I felt there was something missing still. And that is where the meditation and the sound came in, because I realized I wasn't able to regulate my nervous system. I was kind of all over the place, right? I was more of a achievement type of person, just the go-getter, right? And so that was really looking externally and not really turning inward and saying, like, what do I need? What does my heart direction need to go? Things like that. So the music and the meditation had given me the ability to look inside instead of searching externally for the answers or for the direction.
Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. And then for me, it started growing up dyslexic. I was had challenges in the traditional learning model and noticed that I was very different. And music, art, and poetry were always things that really resonated with me. When I became a teenager and beyond, it was like really I started seeing how much joy it started bringing to my life and how much it was helping me. It was always challenging to read something and retain that information. But when I got into poetry and got into subjects that were really fascinating to me, music, art, poetry, health things, I started really seeing that there was a dedication and a drive to want to fix some of those things that were just a little different. And then learning that they were actually superpowers in a lot of ways, that I was able to thrive in other areas that other people weren't, even though I was a little different in an academic or book setting, with them. So that was the start. And then in 2012, I found myself facing colon cancer and MS. And those were very challenging, dark nights of the soul, for me. And music was the one thing that brought me salvation. And that was the thing that helped me shift my mind, started learning more about nutrition, food combinations, and really looking at holistic health as a viable option to get healthy. And so I started learning more about balance, and the beginning of all of that was frequency music. It allowed me to shift my mind into a state where I could actually wrap my head around some of the changes that needed to take place.
That is amazing. So from balance and balance, somehow or another, the two of you became connected. So how did you all get together to create this beautiful synergy with sound healing and holistic wellness?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Honestly, I was an avid podcast listener, and I was listening to Living in 4D with Paul Chek, and Ian was a guest. And I was just like, wow, this is fascinating information. And at the time, it felt so divine that I needed to reach out because I wanted to use the meditation music in my own practice as well as personally, right? So I had reached out, became a member with the company, and honestly, the relationship ended up growing from there over the last couple of years. And so now we are business partners as well as romantic partners. Short version, but yeah.
But that's a challenge in and of itself, right? To keep that balance between relationship and business sort of in order, and the priorities are the priorities, and not one leaking from the other side.
Right.
So well done, you.
Okay, I think what's interesting is there is an age gap with Fallon and I, and I think there's things that I see from a different perspective and she sees from a different perspective, which are that balance again. So you have the masculine and the feminine. You also have the age of the experience versus also the optimistic outlook and like hopeful view of the world versus a person who has been through World War III in a lot of different senses, and kind of you can have that kind of darker or cynical outlook, right? You can say like you can have a different energy, and then you have this new beautiful radiant feminine energy coming in saying, hey, we can maybe do this a different way. And you're like, okay, right? So there's this kind of balance and surrendering. Each of us have grown so much in this relationship, but it's also helped our business to thrive in ways that I have never seen, before Fallon was present. And I think Fallon can agree with her business. And I think we just bring a lot of synergy and teamwork. And I think it's been the biggest mirror for me in my life of the mirror that relationships are. And then even the business is such a mirror for our personal lives. And so it's just such a powerful reflection and such a great teacher, the businesses as well as our relationship. So
that is a really interesting concept. So I talk a lot about pets being our mirrors, and I believe they are indeed. But I forget to extend that analogy to my own business, to relationships and things of, all of those things. So thank you for that reminder. That is a great way to reframe a lot of things. So Ian, the frequency-minded music and listening to Smile really have gained global recognition at this point. But can you explain how sound frequencies can work to promote relaxation and healing, especially for our pets?
Yeah. Well, just as you said, the pets are such a mirror to the owners, right? So it's like a lot of things that people say, oh, I'm surprised that this music, it's been really soothing for me, but my pet just loves it. And I'm like, well, your pet is an extension of you. It's a mirror of you, right? It's something that has been around you 24/7 every day. And you guys have really grown to be family. And all of our family members are a mirror, right? So I think what's interesting is when you look at a human, the first unraveling of any disease or any kind of physical or emotional issue is going to be stress, right? So it's like that is the first part because it starts robbing your health penny by penny, right? So it's like it starts pulling from your digestion, pulling from your organs whenever they're not functioning. It's like in high stress mode, and it's having to produce these stress, adrenaline, cortisol, all these different stress hormones. And it's doing it without having any energy source. You're not feeding it. You're not sleeping well. You're not giving it the things that it needs. So it starts stripping it from other things in your body. It does it to survive. But if it's left unattended long period of time, it's stealing your health penny by penny, right? Until eventually the tax bill is due, right? So I think like when you look at animals and humans, it's like the most powerful thing of sound healing is that it's addressing that pause. It's detaching you from the external and internal world for that split second and giving you a sense of relaxation. The yawning starts, the shoulders drop, the spine relaxes, the muscles stop being so tense. And then a person says, oh my gosh, I haven't felt this good. And it's like, well, when's the last time have you taken a pause? When's the last time you took a deep breath? When's the last time you let go of every stress for just 10 minutes, you know? And I think people don't realize the power of sound and the ability to help with the nervous system. And I think it's super powerful for animals and just as equally for humans.
Amazing. Amazing. Fallyn, you developed the Radiant Balance System, and it's including so many modalities, especially sound healing. But how do you see sound and meditation music fitting into the broader picture of wellness for both people and animals?
I think Ian mentioned the nervous system beautifully, right? Every single one of us has our own unique nervous system. And so, yes, every interaction, physically, Ian and I, we are exchanging energy, right? His nervous system is impacting mine. Same thing if people are down below or up above, like the energy of people impacts us, maybe more so on increased level to some than others, depending on awareness or sensitivity. But wellness, I believe, starts with the nervous system. And so I didn't actually know that until after I went through a whole certification, multiple labs. And it's like that little piece of things that are still missing, right? Something is still off. And so what is that? And so can we start with the nervous system? Can we do, somatic exercises while listening to the music? Maybe we're grounding with our feet in nature to it's kind of like that compounding effect where we're doing one thing and then we're stacking something else because it is that so much more enhanced that way, right? Music is that tool to enhance something that you already are striving for. So I remember starting out with meditation just as a standalone. It was almost like I had these octopus tentacles of my brain, like so many pinging things, right? And so I had to start meditation with words, so guided, right? I couldn't just listen to music. I had someone guide me through the forest or something tranquil. And then that extended to maybe 10 minutes and then 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And so titrating a little bit at a time to expand our capacity is beautiful. And then adding in, can I do this in silence for 10 minutes? Can I do this without words for 10 minutes? And really, it's an experiment, right? It's experiment with your own nervous system. Maybe one thing one day is going to work beautifully while you try it the next day. And it's like, well, I don't feel the same, right? So we have to tweak things a little bit as we go. But starting with the nervous system really helps you become aware of why is it dysregulated in the first place, right? Just the awareness of that is important because then you can ask the good questions about what is it outside or internally that is causing this distress. So that is why we're bringing together the music and the functional labs, because the labs can really allow us to see what is hidden in there that we can't intuitively see, right? What's out of balance, whether that's the hormones, whether there's an overgrowth of bacteria, what is causing some imbalance on the external side, and like how can we look visually outside of like what is that external imbalance. So I think these two things beautifully marry together.
And that makes a great deal of sense. And I think the simple way to put it of addressing nervous system imbalance is that idea that we're often in the modern world in sympathetic or fight or flight state constantly, and not sympathetic or rest and digest. And truly, until you can hit that parasympathetic state and stay there, touch on it, and then stay a little longer, the body is unable to heal because it's too worried about the tiger that's coming that we've created in our minds. And ultimately that we've created in their minds as well. If we're constantly up here, they're with us because they're like, oh my gosh, mom is worried, we're under attack.
Right.
So, well said. I mean, because then if we can work on that and then start to support the body to do the healing process, so much faster, so much more gentle.
I love what you're saying there. One thing I'd like to add too is that when I first got into like the nervous system type of work, I personally worked with somebody on my nervous system as well. And it was almost like learning tools, right? these are all messages for us to take in. And I was like, I'm going to be in parasympathetic like it's my job, right? So like, it was like my goal to always be there. And it's not reality. And a beautiful perspective of a friend that told me, your nervous system should be this flexible spine, right? We are meant to go up and go down. And I think that was beautifully said, because we don't like to feel in our freeze state. We don't like to feel in this high anxiety. But if we can downshift, learn to downshift and come back to center, that's the whole journey. That's the goal, right? There are going to be ups and downs. And if we can learn to flow and take in all the messages, I think that's the golden nugget.
Right on. Get comfortable with the duality of it and accept when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And then you can make better actions in your life. I guess that's a good way to say it. So here's all this really amazing stuff. And you ended up producing something called the Pet Therapy album. And can you walk us through kind of how you started to develop the concept for this and frequency ranges and that were specifically for dogs, cats, and horses? Or are they just good for mammals in general?
Well, okay, so this will be a couple different answers here. So the first part of how this started was I had a lot of friends and family. My two sisters have a lot of animals, and they always have, and they are constantly looking for things for their animals to bring comfort and peace. They love pug dogs, and it's one of their their favorites. But I have a lot of friends who have animals, cats and dogs, as well as horses and birds, that they would see how much traction listening to Smile was getting and like check out some of the music, and it would move them personally. And then they said, well, do you have something that would work with my horse? Do you have something that would work with my dog? And so it was a path, probably about 8 years ago, that I started exploring just the frequency ranges of the animals to see. And then a lot of the studies, the clinical studies on frequency hertz with different animals. And one of the things that I found through mostly so we work a lot with vets, like veteran groups that have battlefield trauma, PTSD, and that type of issue that they're facing. And so we started learning a little bit more about some of the pet therapy programs that the vets were involved with. And one of the things that we found was that there was a lot of similarities between the vets' PTSD with like the 4th of July, certain types of sounds that were just too loud for their, once you go through those moments and you have that PTSD, your body and your nervous system are not quite the same, right? So you're going through these learnings of how to unravel this trauma, this pain. It's a challenging thing for the creator of the music, because you want something that is going to somewhat challenge the animal and the human to grow and evolve and shed the old skin, but also for it to meet them in a place of safety and comfort that's going to help them feel comforted in that journey, so that it becomes a very peaceful ease journey and a transition that is taking its time on a steep incline for that walk up that hill, right? And not just a straight up mountain journey where they're pulling out the axes. We don't want that. We want it to be something that is peaceful. So it was really, the Pet Frequency album was developed at the same time that we started working with the vets. And so there was a consideration of the trauma and the PTSD in both the animal as well as the veteran, groups that we were working with. And so we did a lot of trial and error. We also did a lot of research into the frequencies, and then we started experimenting with animals, like in a peaceful way, right? But just saying, like, let's see how this hurts, this track will do. And so we did some research with the Humane Society, and what we found is the Pet Therapy album, within 5 to 8 minutes, lowered the heart rate of every animal that started listening, whether it was a cat or a dog. Both, animals were, the heart rate was changing between 5 to 8 minutes of listening to the album. It was lowering the heart rate. And so you start seeing, when you can pair that with a trainer or a worker in those facilities that is doing positive reinforcement and the brain entrainment that goes along with the music, you're amplifying, the benefits of that tenfold. It's something it's very, very powerful. So the last part of that, what I'll say is, where we're hearing benefits from people who are using this album, which is in horse stables, with horse therapy, and even traumatized animals that are doing therapy themselves, right? They're going through that process and being groomed into becoming a therapy animal. They're utilizing the music in those settings. But it's the biggest thing that I hear constantly with the pet album is pet owners who have to leave their animals at home while they're at work. And they would constantly bark. They would be in apartment settings and they would be barking at the UPS drivers or any kind of mailman coming up. And then neighbors complain. They bark for 2 hours after the mailman comes, and, that kind of thing. That's what the kind of feedback. And they said, well, when we got your album, we just put it on repeat all day long. And what we noticed is that our animals would come and sit on the floor. They would lay on the couch. They would be peaceful and there was less barking. And so what I was telling them is, if a person is having a really hard time sleeping and you put on, one of the frequency-minded music albums, most of the people who are having problems start sleeping better. And the reason I say that is because there are people who have traumas. There are people who are light sleepers, but then there's people who are always listening as a worry, as a form of worrying. And so whenever that music hits and those lower frequencies, we're talking 20 to 50 hertz in the music, because we utilize a lot of lower frequencies to create that grounding effect and that very peaceful, slow moving frequency. And a lot of the animals, that tonal quality of the music, they're identifying with it, and it's something that's helping them to ground. And it's also blocking out the external noise from the outside street, the beep, the backup cars, beep, 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 all the deliveries, all that stuff. And so it's something that they're finding more peace because it's blocking out the external world for them and giving them a tonal quality that grounds them and keeps them safe and peaceful, and they feel like they're in a sound cocoon. That's what I hear a lot of people say at our events, is they feel like they're in a sound cocoon. So
amazing. So really what part of the effect is that you're helping to reduce that hypervigilant state that goes with either PTSD or phobias, that sort of stuff. And that's amazing. I mean, that is the whole ball game. Is if we can reduce that hypervigilance and then combine that with positive reinforcement, like you've had experience with the shelters, that is truly life-changing for so many of these animals. That's amazing.
Can I speak real quickly on one more thing? So what we found to be one of the most beneficial things was when a lot of these animal shelters, one of the biggest things are putting the animals down, not finding homes for. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was, I said, what if you guys did a doggy and me meditation once a month where the public can come in, bring their animals, and you guys utilize our music and have an outdoor event where you're playing the music and you get people to pet their animals and you're giving them techniques of calming while the music's playing. They can purchase the music and support your shelter, but then you guys can do a tour of all the new animals. How many people have animals and would want another animal, or would know someone that would want an animal, that would come to this for the benefit of this free meditation? But then, you guys give them the run of what's needed and what you're looking for. And then that way it's more of a one-on-one interaction. It's not an email. You're bringing people in person, connecting with them with that energy. And then here's the thing. Once the animal is adopted, the track that you've been working with them for weeks or a month, that's daily, been subjected to them daily. And now they've, have this secure feeling, this entrainment process with this piece of music. You're using the same piece of music with them every day when they're feeding, when they're relaxing, when they're getting when they're petted, when they're being positive reinforced with the music. Now that piece of music during their adoption is going home with them so that the new adoption family has something that is safe in an unsafe environment, right? Bringing some piece of home with them to the new the new place. And then they are also taught those calming methods and the same entrainment that the trainers and the workers at the facility use to help calm the animals. So you're giving something as a tool for not only the animals at these shelters, but also the workers and the adoption families. And so it's just been such a powerful thing to be a part of.
That's amazing. And how brilliant. You must be a master marketer from another lifetime, or maybe this lifetime. But that's a great idea. I mean, the whole process, but especially then sending home that music that is familiar to that animal, that feels safe, that feels like home while they transition into their new home. That's such a beautiful concept. Cool. So aside from the shelter, there's other uses clearly, and really this was designed for stressful events like vet visits, fireworks, storms, that kind of stuff. Do you have any stories or feedback you've received from pet parents who've used the album during these situations?
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's 3 vets that stand out when you say that more than anything, because they had animals that they were working with, and they would say that they would feel like they had to get out of town because the fireworks were just too much for them to endure. And when they got their animals, they started noticing that it was having a similar effect on the animal. The sounds, the loudness was having a similar effect on the animal. And so they were saying, this really made me feel comforted, because most people act like I'm crazy, like, hey man, it's just fireworks, And so he said that several of these vets said that they felt like they had a real friend in that connection with their pet. But the next step was, I bought the album for my pet, the pet therapy album. They say I probably am listening to it more than introducing it to my animal. And so they were saying there was a lot of vets who were saying they were having a lot of positive breakthroughs with the pet therapy album. But they were also talking about how the pets wanted to lay on the speakers. That was just constantly the feedback, is that the pets would physically go to the phone and lay on it, or go to the speaker and put their paw on it, or want to lay next to the speaker while the music was playing.
So they really wanted to feel that vibration.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Really interesting. And that makes sense too. So there's something called adaptal, which is a dog appeasing pheromone. And what's interesting to me is that particularly for men that had experienced some trauma, it seemed to actually relieve their feelings of worry and anxiety. So that's very interesting. I'm not quite sure why that is, but I had many men, and I did some work with veterans in my last brick and mortar practice, but it's like, oh, well, that's great. Here, use it some more. And I had a couple of guys that said, man, that stuff just helps me sleep so much. So it's interesting that there is that connection on so many fronts. So as pet parents maybe they don't have pets that have really severe noise phobias, but they're just looking to optimize their daily routines and support their pet's overall well-being. How can pet parents start incorporating this music, the meditation music and the frequencies, into their daily routine to help support their pets?
Yeah. So when we were talking about easily titrating things in, starting small with 10 minutes a day is a perfect place to start. There's very minimal investment, minimal effort, but for a large impact. And guaranteed, if you play this 10 minutes a day for a week, you are going to see the benefit, and just minor changes, right? Observing those. So morning time would probably be the most appropriate to start with, or the evening time, right? Either one of those to really set up the day or easily transition into sleep. And so that's the perfect place to start.
And that makes a great deal of sense, because our anxiety level is high at the beginning of the day because we're ramping up to leave the house often or start work if we're working at home. And then if we don't do something at the end of the day to disconnect from the day, that ramp stays with us.
Exactly.
So that totally makes sense. Right on. And do you feel like there are specific environments or activities the pet parent could be doing that might enhance this benefit, or really just start small and Again.
Yeah, so like Ian was mentioning with the event at the Humane Society, same thing with your pet at home, right? If you're playing the track for 10 minutes, talking to it in a very loving way, petting it, brushing it, getting it fresh water, food, really marrying those two together that, oh my gosh, you're going to be like, there's this reward here. There's this loving calmness presence about the experience. And so that over time begins to be like, oh my gosh, this song's on. Am I going to get a treat? Or am I going to, go outside or go for a walk? And so really loving up on your pet while you're introducing this. And I think the owners will find that it's helping them as well. The experience, like Ian mentioned, it doesn't have to be the pet therapy album just for pets. It's going to be for the owners as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing. In India, when you get into meditation mudras, right? Like so what's happening there, a lot of people, I think, in the Western world overlook is that there's an entrainment energetically into the fingers. So when you're doing this meditation over and over, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, eventually at one point you're going to go into that mudra, making the meditation pose. And what's going to happen is all of those meditations that you've done are going to be activated where your body's like, okay, I know what we're doing. I got you, and it starts falling into this measure through muscle memory almost, correct? But it's also part of the nervous system. You're training your nervous system through this repetition, this consistency, but it's also the reprogramming. And I think that the entrainment process with the music is very similar. What pet owners are going to see is that this might take them a few weeks, it might take them a month. It really depends on the animal. But eventually what's going to happen is when that music is switched on, it's not going to need the action from you as the owner. It's going to actually kick in and the animal's going to be like, I got you. I know what time it is, and so
Right.
Yeah. So it's very powerful. I think music is such a powerful thing. If you look at music's effects in advertisements, entertainment, like movies and things like that, it's like if you took a Marvel superheroes movie and took the soundtrack away, there is no suspense, there is no action. So whenever you're putting action or an entrainment or a new process with an animal, utilizing music is such a powerful reinforcement and amplifier of what the intention is that you're working with. It's just such a powerful tool.
Interesting. I'm not sure if this will make sense to you or not, but I remember reading about, there was a lot of research on the placebo effect and also utilizing somatic experiencing to repeat the effect of the event. And there was an example of a young woman that was undergoing chemotherapy, and it was just brutal for her. Mm-hmm. But what she was able to do is take that experience. Okay, I've got the injection. Ooh, my body fever is starting to crank up. I'm starting to feel achy. And she was able to replay that experience again and again and again and never received another dose of chemotherapy. And her cancer went into remission. So essentially, this entrainment process, and that's essentially what she was doing for herself, is entraining the pet to be able to know where to take their nervous system response when they hear the music. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure that you've seen the research on the monks that are meditating in the Himalayas, and basically they wrap the monk in wet sheets in the snow. They take them outside to the cold. They wrap them in wet sheets, cold, wet sheets. And then they ask them to use their mind to raise their body temperature. So they start envisioning themselves on a warm spring day. And then they put, they hooked, the different test gathering tools on them. It was everything, their feet, their hands, their head, they had the electrodes on everything. But basically what they saw was there was a new state, a new brainwave state, hyper gamma, which was being activated in these monks where they were visually take themselves to a warm spring day. Their body temperature was rising, and it would basically, suck all the water out of the wet sheet, and it would just become dry. It was something that their body temperature rose, and it would just, evaporate the wetness. And so, you can see how powerful placebo is, mind over matter. It's in medicine, and a lot of clinical testing can show the power of the placebo. But yeah, I think for me, when I'm talking about the placebo effect with our music, I think bass is the placebo. Because if I were to play a Native American flute to you, you'd be like, wow, that's really pretty. I like that, Ian. That was a good job, right? But then if I brought in a bass frequency and dropped it on you in a room, you're going to be like, whoa, something's happening. I can feel it in my body. I feel it. It's like my body's vibrating. What's happening? Like, well, something's going on. And then this facade drops. It's like, I feel something happening, so it must be working. Right. And so for me, the bass is what drops the curtains and all of the facades that we have. And it allows our body to experience something new and unknown. And it's what helps people, I think, open to these experiences in a much larger, more open-minded way. And that's where the magic starts really working, I think, for humans.
And that makes a great deal of sense. So, that to me, that begs the question, if our anxiety level, our inability to not modulate our neural state is just non-existent, let's say, or really poorly controlled, and that energy is being sort of pushed into our animals, aside from the situation where an animal has come from a shelter. Perhaps what's happening is that we're both teaching ourselves and the pets that if the music is playing, we're all safe. And that makes, so it's kind of like that idea of the monks is that they were able to take themselves someplace else. And so perhaps what's happening is the person's modulated their energy, neurologic energy down towards a calmer state. And the pet's like, oh, good, mom's covered. I can just chill and go do my thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Example from even a personal but professional level, when I'm working with clients and I'm doing some somatic experiencing exercises with them. So really the sense of touch on the body to help bring safety to it. And so I noticed, like, if we're first starting to work together, I might not see a yawn from them or their shoulders come down or a spontaneous yawn. I probably won't see that within the first 5 minutes, maybe 20 minutes if we're doing it for that long. But after several sessions of doing it together, and say we do the same somatic exercise, like containment or something, I will see a yawn, a transition much quicker. And so the body is like, oh, I'm familiar with this sense of safety, this sense of touch now. I can relax. So it's almost like we are comforting that little girl or that little boy within inside of us and saying, hey, I'm here right now, right? We can calm down, we can have a yawn. And so I notice that with myself. If I'm doing a containment exercise within the first 3 minutes, I'm yawning. I'm like, okay, I'm fine now. And so it takes that repetition or that awareness to see, what do I need in this moment?
It's interesting. So it's almost like the yawn is the equivalent of the dog or the cat or the whoever, the animal shaking off the thing that was scary.
Right.
So that somatic experiencing idea, I can't remember the author's name, but he developed this from observing animals that had been attacked by predators but escaped. And if they physically shook it off, they were good. But the ones that just held on to it, they ended up weakening and eventually becoming prey. Mm-hmm. So that's quite interesting. Huh. So, Ian, I mean, you all are doing just amazing, good things together, but how do you see sound healing sort of evolving in the wellness industry? And what role do you think pets are going to play in this movement?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm kind of old school, in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot of tech that's coming out trying to help put people physically into a certain brainwave state. And to me, that's a very masculine energy. It's a very forceful energy. Like, hey, we're going to meditate whether you like this or not, right? So it's like for me, and I think that it's also a lazy, outlook. It's like wanting something to do it for you. And as we know in pharmaceutical, there's not a pill that fixes everything. And I think all of us are so different and have such unique makeups and experiences that it's really hard for one thing to fix everything on a person and for it to be across the board, right? So for me, like Fallon and I both talk to our clients, we say healing is multifaceted approach. It's multifacets. It's not just the music. The music is going to amplify the intention and action that you're putting into this, right? So if you're not doing the action and you're not getting serious with your intention, the music is not going to help you as a human. Now, the animal is different. It's a different interaction with the cats, horses, and dogs. But us, we have this thing where we get in our own way a lot. We overthink. We're critical of ourselves in ways that are very different, I think, than animals because of the consciousness level that we've been gifted with as humans, right? But there are these relationships, masculine, feminine, the family dynamics, the external work environments, the chemicals and, our environments that have effect on us as humans. And so it's like, I believe sound, the main goal for me and with, listening to Smile is to create something that is viable to the outside world to see that this is a real modality that can help me reset my nervous system, and that there's a real value in being able to learn to do this on my own, not having technology, not having a pill do it for me, but learning how to do this so that Fallon said earlier, anything that comes up, you're able to be the master flexor, where it's like, and I think that when you look at our society, it's what's happening right now. Everything's coming to a head to force people out of comfort, right? It's like you think about the 1950s way of life, the picket fence, the family, the dog out in the yard, and like the night one person's income sustains the household. Those days are gone. It's not the same anymore, right? So everyone's being challenged and faced with, this is not working. We have to do something else. But what is it? And everybody wants to stay in their comfort zone, right? They want it to look this way. So I think this is the challenge for us as practitioners and as business owners is to navigate these uncertain times and to find ways to regulate our nervous system so that you can get out there and do the job again tomorrow, right? Because we're all here at this time because we chose to be, and because, we picked this, like, hey, we want to be part of this massive transit that's, happening, this transition that's happening on Earth right now. And so I think that is what our job is to help people feel comfortable, say you're not alone. And here are some tools that helped us that might help you. Let's look at what we can do to add value to each other's lives and just help it spread so that more people are learning to connect with themselves intuitively and internally and stop looking for other people to tell them what to do, because most of that we've seen is not working either, right? It's So I think we're in the age of intuition where people are going to start taking more responsibility. And I think that our music and our company and the way that we're trying to do things would love to play a part in helping to be part of that transition of people taking more responsibility, having more sovereignty, and learning how to take care of each other and love each other better.
That is incredibly beautiful. And I think it is much needed. And you're right. I think that a lot of what's going on that's uncomfortable in the world is because we gave up our sovereignty, as you said, and also our responsibility to ourselves and to the people and the animals and the planet, frankly. So, well said. So, what is next for both of you in terms of projects, innovations, wellness, sound healing, the whole kit and caboodle?
So one thing we have coming up in August is a sonic meditation facilitator certification. So we have several of those this year, and it's fun to plan them. It's a little bit overwhelming because it is like a 4-day certification. This one in August is going to be in Colorado. We're still in the works of setting one up in Seattle late August, and then potentially another one in Austin, Texas in September. So those are kind of our endeavors, our larger endeavors right now. That seems very exciting for us. So you can talk a little bit more about the certification.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically what we're doing is we're teaching practitioners how they can actually, for example, I would say 90% of holistic practitioners are breaking copyright law. And the reason I'm saying that is, as a musician,
Yes.
A lot of people are using Spotify in their businesses, which is illegal. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is there are ways that you can support the musicians who are creating music for you that you're using and branding it for yourself, right? That's what our company does, is we help people learn how to brand the music and to utilize it, just like the entrainment processes, right, that we were speaking of. When you introduce a new sale, a new service, when you're, putting out your newsletter, your social media, when you have consistency with your music and the focus of the music, and you're, utilizing those key points and growing that, then you're keeping everything in-house, right? You're keeping, so the albums are now done by the company or the practitioner. The playlists are made there. The events evolve around that. Their courses, their workshops, everything is branded, and they're actually keeping everything to where it's amplifying itself. So what we're doing is we're teaching people about frequency, how this works, how to interact with it, how to build community, and how to build their business with revenue models around it. And that's really what we're doing with these certifications. So
yeah. And then the second piece of the excitement is really fine-tuning the frequencies and how we can envelop that into like the clinical setting. So, with the lab testing, say, for example, there's a overgrowth of bacteria, or, the liver is kind of dysfunctional, or maybe it's the gallbladder, whatever organ is really coming up. How can we utilize frequency, really targeted approach to the detox protocol, so we can maybe be a little gentler in the supplementation when we're pairing it with frequency, or maybe we can fast track it a little bit better, right? And so we're kind of working on adding albums that are specific to thyroid, to liver, to the womb space, and really just, again, pairing those aspects together even further.
Cool. That's amazing. So, y'all, this has been so much fun. Fallon, Ian, how can folks find you, find the Pet Therapy album, and really dig into your work a little bit more?
On our website, listeningtosmile.com, at the top, there are album suggestions or recommendations. I can't remember what it says, but it's album recommendations at the top in the menu. And if they go to that, they'll see that we have, children, teenagers, adults, and we have pets. And so it goes into, there's a little write-up about the music. And when they click on that, it'll take them to where they can sample the music and go through the album. And you guys will have your own code where they'll get 20%, off of the album through your code, Dr. Ruth. And
Sweet.
So, yeah.
That's so generous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there one last message you'd like to leave folks with when they're thinking about the transformative power of sound healing for their pets?
Yeah. So we talked about the introduction of the music. Honestly, very simple suggestion is to do 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, of just starting with the Pet Therapy album for yourself and for your animal.
And I think having that accountability partner with the owners, being able to sit with them the first few times, especially, working with the music, petting, and just talking to them in a loving connection way, just heart space, connecting with the animal, with the music. And just, I really think if people do that for 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night, each night for a week, they will see a difference in that animal and themselves. I think it's a really interesting thing, because this is almost a tool to give them permission to pause for both the owner and the animal that they're working with.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, you all. And for those of you listening, thanks for joining us today, and keep watching for new episodes of Healing Tales. Thanks for listening to Healing Tales, where pet parents become healers, one tail wag at a time. Want more tools and support? Head to drruthroberts.com. Until next time, trust your gut, question the noise, and keep showing up for your pet.